Hello everyone! Thank you for joining us today for another webinar in our Market Access and International Approvals webinar series. My name is Lauren and I'm part of the Certification and Approvals technical staff here at Vista Compliance Laboratories. Today I'll be presenting to you the certification and approval regulations as well as the technical requirements for electrical equipment, electronics, and wireless product and device approval in Ukraine. The National Commission for the State Regulation of Communications, or NCCIR, is the regulatory body that creates all the licensing and registration procedures for radio and telecommunications devices. Now, this authority can either go by NRKZI or NCCIR. For this presentation, I will be using the English translation of NCCIR. The NCCIR management and utilization of the radio frequency spectrum is carried out in an efficient manner so as to prevent harmful disturbances or interference. Through standardization and government policy, NCCIR is able to provide quality guarantees to better facilitate the economic growth in Ukraine and offer the proper protection to the public. Its goal is to provide the protection of health and property, the safety of people and domestic animals, and to avoid any harmful interference. Any radio frequency and telecom device is required to be properly approved prior to being marketed or imported into Ukraine. A type examination certificate and declaration are required for radio equipment and other regulated devices to be sold in or imported into Ukraine. Vista Laboratories is an EMC and RF compliance test lab and product certification body, and we are experts in global regulatory approvals for radio frequency devices. So today we'll be going over the requirements of radio frequency and telecommunications approvals in Ukraine. In this webinar, we will provide an overview of the major topics necessary to understand to get your radio devices on the right track for authorization and distribution in Ukraine. If you have any questions on the topics presented today, or any other immediate questions regarding compliance testing and product certifications, you can reach us at info@vista-compliance.com. Without further ado, let's begin the presentation. Starting with a brief overview, what is the NCCIR? The National Commission for the State Regulation of Communications is responsible for the licensing and registration procedures for radio and telecommunications in Ukraine. It also ensures the efficacy and quality of telecommunications. The NCCIR regulates the use of radio equipment, including in connection with software, which can affect compliance with significant requirements. The NCCIR has the power to act as a licensing, authorizing, and regulatory body, as well as a state supervisory body. Products must be properly approved and certified before being imported into the country. Most of the Ukrainian standards are based on European standards with DSTU added to the name. CE test reports can be leveraged to bypass in-country testing. It is mandatory for every wireless or telecom device that's produced, assembled, used, or traded within the Ukrainian territory to comply with the technical requirements based on the applicable regulation. A declaration of conformity is required for radio equipment and other regulated devices to be sold in or imported into Ukraine. The NCCIR has two approval methods: paperwork only or testing and paperwork review. Since CE documents can be leveraged to gain approval in Ukraine, most people go with the documentation technical review route. However, local testing may be applicable if the technical documents are not sufficient enough. The conformity assessment is proved by the Declaration of Conformity. This declaration must be registered with the NCCIR. and a local representative must issue the DOC in the Ukrainian language. The Ukrainian DOC is equivalent to the DOC in accordance to RED in Europe. The regulations concerning these documents are almost the same. In fact, Ukrainian standards mirror EU standards with DSTU added to the name. The main idea of the declaration is to declare technical compliance to Ukrainian requirements. It is important to note that CE marking is not sufficient. Any EU products still need the independent NCCIR approval. We know the main approval method is the documentation technical review, so let's briefly take a look at an overview of that approval process. First off, the authoritative body can issue accreditation to Ukrainian certification bodies who can then issue approvals for all the schemes, which are radio frequency, EMC, safety, and ROHS. The first step in the application process is to submit a full submission and/or a sample to a Ukraine CV and local holder for review. The certification body will review the submission documents or conduct a test of the sample if applicable. Once the document review and any sample testing is complete, the CB will issue the type examination certificate. This document is important in order for the local holder to issue the DOC. So once the type examination certificate is issued, then the DOC can be issued as well. There is one module of approval which allows the issuance of the declaration without the certificate, and that is with the presence of test reports with the Ukrainian standards DSTU. So if the test reports were tested to DSTU standards, you may bypass the type examination certificate process and go straight to the issuance of the declaration. The declaration of conformity should be issued to the manufacturer or their authorized representative, and the UATR conformity mark should be placed to confirm the compliance with the Ukrainian technical regulations. The lead time for approval is about 6 to 8 weeks. The difference between the type examination certificate and the declaration is that the type examination certificate is issued by an accredited CB internally, and this allows the manufacturer or local holder to issue the declaration of conformity. Both documents have the same approval number on the certificates. For the type examination certificate, you may need one sample for testing. There is no need for testing if there are full detailed technical documents available. I will go over all the necessary documents later in this presentation, but for type examination, you also need a declaration indicating the software and hardware of the device, a Ukrainian language user guide, EU DOC and test reports to RED standards, and the risk assessment report. For the declaration, if the product needs sample testing, the testing for the type examination certificate is sufficient. Along with the normal documentation, you will need to submit the signed power of attorney from the manufacturer to the local holder and a declaration confirming the person signing the POA. Family approvals are allowed, and the validity period for both documents is indefinite, but for the declaration, the certificate must be held by the local holder for at least 10 years. The local holder can be any registered company in Ukraine, such as a distributor, manufacturer, etc. It does not have to be the importer. Here, the declaration is the key document. This is what we are going to use to support the actual import of the product. The scope of products regulated by the NCCIR comes down to anything with radio functionality. This includes WLAN, Bluetooth, keyless transmitters, mobile printers, and car navigation, just to name a few. Some exceptions from approval are receive-only devices, amateur radio equipment, and aviation equipment. Some approved equipment will need to go through NCCIR registration following approval. Any product that goes through NCCIR registration will require additional listings on the product label. The lead time can also be extended about 6 weeks for any device needing this registration. The NCCIR registration is the Electronic Device Register of Ukraine. Radio equipment with a low level of compliance with essential requirements will need to be registered after approval. Some examples of such products are multi-radio equipment containing WLAN, Bluetooth, and cellular technology, and all the technologies have an output power exceeding 100 milliwatts in EIRP. So, if the equipment contains WLAN and cellular that are both above 100 milliwatts, but Bluetooth is below 100 milliwatts, then you do not need to register. Only if all three have an output power exceeding 100 milliwatts EIRP will you need to register. Another example is WLAN devices operating in the 5470 to 5725 MHz band, only which are intended for outdoor installation, and radio equipment intended for determination of location or speed, such as automotive radar devices. As I said earlier, if a product needs NCCIR registration, it could be an additional 6 weeks lead time on top of the approval process lead time. Along with the NCCIR certification, a product could also need certification for EMC, safety, or ROHS. The certification body will do all the approvals and everything can be submitted all at once. When applying for type approval, we should be aware of what technical requirements are applicable and appropriate for the device seeking certification. There is a separate certificate for all the requirements, EMC, safety, and ROHS, but it will be the same approval process as the one I talked about earlier to get the certificate. All standards are almost identical to the EU standards. The technical regulation for EMC is based on EU EMC Directive 2014-30 EC, Technical Regulation of Electromagnetic Compatibility of Equipment. The scope is radio electronics, telecom, and ITE host equipment, and receiver-only devices. The process is a paperwork-only process with evaluation based on EU test reports. The lead time is 3 weeks, and a project-specific LOA is required for signature by the local holder. The safety regulation is based on EU safety, Technical Regulation of Low Voltage Equipment. The scope is any mains-powered equipment or equipment charged via an AC-DC adapter. The process is also paperwork-only process with evaluation based on the EU IEC test reports. EN and IEC 60950 and EN IEC 62368 are both accepted. Like EMC approval, the lead time is 3 weeks and a project-specific LOA is required for signature by the local holder. ROHS is the restriction of the use of certain hazardous substances in electrical and electronic equipment. This is based on EU Directives 2011-65 EU and 2015-863. The scope for ROHS is appliances, telecom equipment and equipment for information processing, consumer equipment, lighting equipment, and general electronic equipment. Approvals for ROHS can only be issued with other applications, such as EMC or safety. It cannot be issued by itself. The process is also paperwork-only process based on EU test reports, but we can do local testing if the test report is unavailable. Such as with the previous two, the lead time is also 3 weeks. Manufacturers are required to submit both the RoHS Conformity Assessment Report to the standard EN 50581-2012 and the Ukrainian Language User Manual. Okay, there are two other types of approvals a device might need. DSSCCI is required for any device that connects directly to public network in Ukraine, and metrology is applicable for non-automatic weighing instruments. For DSSCCI, registration is required to give permission for equipment to connect to the public network of Ukraine and allows every provider to operate it on their network. The certification process involves a factory audit performed by a CB who issues the factory audit report and reviews the application. The lead time is 8 to 12 weeks, with an additional 4 weeks if SSU approval is required. SSU is the security service of Ukraine, and they determine whether or not that equipment falls under lawful interception. Family approvals are permitted, and additional documents needed will be the factory inspection agenda, audit program, quality management system policy and questionnaires, and application forms. For metrology, 2 as-sold samples will be needed for local testing, and there will be a factory inspection. The approval of the quality management system certificates is usually issued in 3 to 4 months, and factory inspection takes 1 to 2 weeks. Both certificates last for 3 years, with metrology needing an annual inspection. Local testing may be applicable if there is not sufficient enough technical documentation. If there is full detailed technical documentation provided, then sample testing can be avoided. We can leverage any EU test reports to avoid the testing process and proceed with a paperwork-only process. NCCIR standards mirror EU standards with DSTU added to the name. For example, the standard ETSI EN 300-328 would be the NCCIR standard DSTU ETSI EN 300-328. The required documents for certification are test reports, circuit scheme, BOM, technical description, user manual in the Ukrainian language, photos including external, internal, and test setup, the ISO certificate, and then the factory questionnaire and POA for the local holder, both of which are provided. The DOC or a reference to it, such as a web link, must be part of the user manual. It can be the full or short form in the Ukrainian language. The CE risk assessment in the Ukrainian language is also part of the documentation. The certification process takes roughly 6 to 8 weeks. The certificate is valid indefinitely, but the technical mandate states that the local holder does need to hold the declaration for at least 10 years. The local holder needs to be able to present the declaration to any authorities in the case of market surveillance. Family approvals are permitted in Ukraine for radio frequency and telecom devices. Multiple branding is also permitted here, so this means a product can be sold under multiple brand names. You do not need a separate certificate for each brand name. For modular approvals, they are allowed in some cases, but it is not sufficient enough to cover the host as well. Any end product or device with a radio module inside is considered a host device and will still require its own approval at the host level. Labels are required for all radio and telecom products marketed and sold in Ukraine. After the successful approval of a product by the authority, The manufacturer is obligated to mark the product with the associated national conformity mark. The label is a mark that the equipment complies with the technical regulations in Ukraine, and the purpose is intended to protect consumers and help the NCCIR monitor the market. The national conformity mark and the product type and model number should be placed on the equipment. If it is not possible to put it on the equipment, it must be on the packaging and accompanying documents. The manufacturer's name, trademark, and postal address should also be listed, if not on the product, then in the additional documents, so customers may get a hold of them if they need to. This is the same mark that is used for all the certifications, RF, EMC, Safety, and ROHS. The mark must be at least 5 millimeters in height. The ID number of the CV that approved the equipment can be affixed under the national conformity mark if the assessment of the product was based on a full quality assurance involving a factory inspection. This is uncommon, and most manufacturers just use the national conformity mark. There are additional requirements for products that went through the NCCIR registration process. Manufacturers must also apply the NCCIR registration number to the device or user manual for radio equipment that falls under NCCIR registration, along with the national conformity mark. This number must be included before any of the approved equipment is imported or sold in Ukraine. So a little deeper dive into the NCCIR registration number. The format is shown here as UARF RXYZ. The UARF is a permanent prefix. This will be the constant for all the NCCIR registered products. The R is the manufacturer's designated area allotment as specified in Article 5 of Radio Regulation of the International Telecommunication Union. The X's and Y's are the letters allocated to the specific manufacturer of the radio equipment, and the Z's are the letters or numbers allocated to the specific radio equipment. Just to recap, all the approved equipment needs the national conformity mark, and any product under the NCCIR registration will also need the NCCIR registration number along with the national conformity mark. The following information will be shown on the certificate: the certificate number, date of certificate issuance, product information such as the name and model, applicable technical requirements the product is in compliance with, manufacturer information such as name and address, place of origin, and the CAB information such as the Conformity Assessment Body name and registration number. Certificates are valid indefinitely, and the certificate allows the manufacturer to issue a DOC for importation. Before any radio equipment is imported or used in Ukraine, it must be certified. The certification is intended to guarantee the interoperability among equipment, avoid interference between equipment, and protect consumers and domestic animals. Importers must make sure the product is in compliance with all the relevant technical regulations and make sure it has all the proper certificates. All imported products must be properly marked with the national conformity mark and, if applicable, the product's NCCIR registration number. The declaration is the key document here. You will not be able to import your product without this document. It shows that the equipment has gone through the process to get properly certified. The ongoing compliance of the product will be surveyed by the authority. It is mandatory to keep technical documentation on the territory of Ukraine and provide it to market surveillance authorities upon request. At the reasonable request of the public market surveillance authorities, importers must provide all the necessary information and documentation in paper or electronic form to demonstrate compliance with the requirements of the radio technical regulations. If the specified radio equipment presents a risk, importers, in order to protect the health and safety of consumers, need to test samples of the radio equipment provided by the market and investigate it. If necessary, the importer needs to keep a register of complaints and inadequate requirements for radio equipment, and they need to inform distributors of any such monitoring. If found to be inadequate, there could be some monetary fines. If there is a change in the regulations, the NCCIR may request the equipment to get a new certificate. This is only for some certain cases, such as when the equipment no longer falls under that technical regulation. For any modifications, you must file with the certification body and go through a document re-evaluation. This process is similar to the process for permissive changes, so you will not have to resubmit every single document. This concludes our webinar on Ukrainian market access, certifications, and approvals for electrical equipment and wireless products. I hope this webinar was helpful for you in understanding the process for NRKZI, NCCIR approval and certifications, as well as what requirements are applicable for your products. Compliance with the technical requirements of the NCCIR is required for all radio and telecom products. It ensures telecommunication network interoperability, avoids harmful interference between telecommunication equipment, and ensures public safety. All electrical equipment and devices require approval in Ukraine prior to distribution or placement on the market. Vista Compliance Labs specializes in certifications, approvals, and compliance testing for electrical and radio frequency devices. We are a 17025 accredited EMC and RF compliance test lab and a 17065 accredited product certification body. We are a telecommunications certification body in the US, Canada, EU, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan, and we provide certification and approvals for all product types in countries all over the world. If you would like to stay in touch with regulatory updates, follow us online. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions on the information presented today, or any other general inquiries, you can reach us anytime at info@vista-compliance.com. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.